history. How can I get rid of that? So I'll try that. We see in our little history that we were established in 1951, and this is what we have presented on our sort of poster, and we have it in our brochure. Started in 1951 to enable fiber artists to expand their skills and share with others their interests in these. And this is actually our current mission statement in the bylaws about the goals of the organization. But was the Guild created in 1951? According to the minutes, and I need to tell you that we have these notebooks of minutes for the years starting in 1956 and continuing to the present. Minutes, treasurer's reports, board minutes, attendance sheets. It says the first meeting of the Guild was held Saturday afternoon in May in 56 at the Washington Community Center with an address with 23 persons attending. The minutes go on that it was presided over by Roy Ginstrom, I think, of the Iowa State Teachers College. The bylaws were read and accepted. Slate of officers were presented. Mrs. E.E. McGee, that's her husband's initials, and Mrs. Lila Gallup of Waterloo. And then the minutes actually show in handwriting they were elected chairwomen. That was crossed out, chairs. Mrs. Kenneth Johnson of Cedar Falls and Secretary Mrs. Hazel Lang of Waterloo, treasurer. Continuing the minutes, a very interesting movie, Homespun, was shown and plans for a workshop to be presented. The meeting was adjourned and refreshments and a social hour. So some of the traditions of our Guild were established at that first meeting. We serve refreshments and we talk. Now, who are these founders? Well, that Roy Ginstrom was on the art faculty of the Iowa State Teachers College, UNI, pre-UNI. And the cool thing is one of his weavings was featured in a show at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City just the year before, I think. Or it was shown then. It was donated in 55, and there is a picture of it that's up on the MoMA website, woven around 1955. And we don't get much detail, so it's kind of a mystery, but there it is. Let's see, can I get rid of that? Will it take us back to the, no? Oh, shoot.
Just to let you know, Karen, we actually didn't see it because you're only sharing the PowerPoint screen.
Oh, shoot. Okay, well, yeah, if we have this available then to others, then we will, that will be available for people to click on the link, or just go to the MoMA site and say, are we seeing this now?
You're still in PowerPoint, so unless you share your entire screen, we can't see anything but PowerPoint.
Can you see, are you still on that page where that link was? Are you still seeing that?
Yes.
Okay, and then we don't have any other record of Professor Ginstrom, spelled either the Swedish way or the American way, as a member of the Guild. Do you see the next slide now?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. This Mrs. E. Yes?
I'm only seeing you. I'm not seeing any PowerPoint at all.
Oh, no. Uh-oh. Am I no longer sharing the screen?
I can see it.
I can see it.
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure why I can't. Let's see.
I can see your screen.
Okay, okay. Well, that's Mrs. E. McGee. Who was she? Well, from Google searching and so on, turns out she was married to Dr. E. McGee at Allen Hospital. They lived on Prospect up in the Highland Park area, sort of northeast Waterloo, and they also had a farm north of town. We know that because back in 1943, their twin daughters and 5 friends were photographed for the society page of the Waterloo Courier. These women, they were having their coming out. They were having their social, and they had gathered at the McGee's farm for a farewell party before leaving for college. And the caption of the photo read, "Blue jeans were worn at this farmyard farewell party." So this was society news. These young women were photographed on a bale of straw with one of them was sitting on the fence in blue jeans. And Faye McGee, then, this Mrs. E.E. McGee, Faye McGee was listed as a member through the 1960s, and then her address in the member books changed to the Lutheran apartment in Cedar Falls. Apparently there was only one apartment at that time. Mrs. Lila Gallup, the other co-chair, lived at 617 Woolbury in Waterloo, and that is right in the heart of town, right by Lincoln Park and so on. She was a manager for 38 years at Walker's, which supplied poultry products and meds before the business was sold away, according to the Courier, to an out-of-state owner. She was also mentioned in the Courier as playing violin and saxophone at St. Paul's Methodist in her younger years. Lila Gallup and Faye McGee were two of the three members of the nominating committee for that first meeting in 1956 too. So maybe they had difficulty finding candidates and agreed to put their own names on the slate as co-chairs. I don't know. But Lila Gallup continued as a guild member for a few years. And then elected secretary at that meeting, Mrs. Kenneth Johnston, who signs the minutes. I think it's Margaret. I think that's how she's spelling it. And she's listed by her husband's name or a couple of initials. They lived on Washington Street in Cedar Falls, which is just northeast of where the Hearst Center for the Arts is. It was the Hearst home at the time. And then by 58, they had moved down to Searly Boulevard right across from the Hearst home. And she was a member through the 1960s. And and I can't find photographs for any of these people. Mrs. Hazel Lang was elected treasurer and lived in Linwood in Waterloo, which is on the west side. So it's 4 blocks east of Isla's Bakery and 4 blocks west of the Balkan Cafe that's over by Mama Nick's Pizzeria. She was a member for only 2 years, and then her name was crossed off the list in the 59-60 member book. So it may be, sometimes when people were crossed out, it meant that they passed away. But was this meeting in 1956, was this the beginning of the Guild? We've got a couple of intriguing items here. One, Roy Ginstrom and all 4 of the new officers were on a list of 129 names and with addresses, headed weavers, and dated the January before that May meeting. And this is just the top part of the first of those 4 pages, front and back. Most of them are typed, and then some are handwritten in the back, handwritten within. So there was a list of at least 129 weavers in January of 1960. So that's before that first meeting in May of 1956. And included with the minutes of this meeting on May 16th, 1956 was the slate of officers presented by the nominating committee. And that slate was dated May 26th for some reason, typed on the letterhead stationery of the Waterloo Weavers Guild, Waterloo, Iowa. And here is that sheet. Oops, sorry, it's a little fuzzy. You can't see it, but it says Waterloo Weavers Guild, Waterloo, Iowa on the top of the sheet. And those are the 4 officers that slate was accepted. And also the names of the nominating committee, 2 of whom were the same as the new officers. So our hypothesis is that the Waterloo Weavers Guild was created in 51. And we seem to date our guild from the beginning of that organization in 1951. And then the Northeast Iowa Weavers Guild was created in 1956, maybe to continue the work of the former guild, but to broaden its focus to Northeast Iowa. So we seem to celebrate as though we were founded in 51, not 56. The 25th anniversary of the Northeast Iowa Weavers and Spinners Guild was celebrated in 1977, and the 50th anniversary was celebrated in 2001. So here's the luncheon committee. I wish you could see, I don't know if you can see in detail, the elaborate food there. There's punch, there are raw veggies within this tall vase. There are all kinds of goodies there. Somebody has already started sampling the beverage. And then the close-up, we have from left to right Elaine Webbeking, Vi Lund, and Connie Hughes, who is still a member. And behind them on the wall is a Lee's Surrender. I don't remember who wove it. Maybe Marty Olson, maybe Virginia Cleaver. But it was framed and posted in this. That was our Main Street fiber art studio. So we act as though we started in 2001, but then we also celebrated our 50th anniversary in 2003, apparently. Carla found in the scrapbook that at this Courier article in 2003 that we're spinning our way into the golden anniversary and that we've paid off the building. We'll have a little bit more information about that later. So we have Doms in the front weaving tapestry. We have Carla Bolin. I can't remember what she's doing. I'm spinning in the back, and Janice Fobian over on the right is spinning on one of the guild wheels. So maybe a Waterloo Weavers Guild had existed for a few years before they noticed that many members lived outside Waterloo, like Mina Hallett, who came from Brandon, 27 miles southeast of where the Guild's current fiber art studio is in Waterloo. Lily Doms came from this little town of Lincoln in Tama County, 30 miles south of the current studio. That town, by the way, had been called Berlin until some nasty anti-German incidents in 1918. And then Mr. and Mrs. Jean Burton, both of them came all the way from Strawberry Point, 60 miles northeast of the current studio. But that first meeting was held place on 4th Street in Waterloo, according to the minutes, 4th Street. So it's listed as the Washington Community Center, 1419 East 4th Street, Waterloo, Iowa. But is that correct? Was there at that time a structure at 1419 East 4th Street? There's nothing there now. It'd be on the west side or north side of the street, northeast east of Sullivan Park and across 4th Street from where currently the East Side Ministerial Alliance and the Tri-County Head Start building are. There's nothing there now. Was there? Is that where the Washington Community Center was at the time? In another set of minutes, the community center was located on West 4th Street. So today, 1419 West 4th is an old 2-story building, a house, but 419, what if it's 419 West 4th Street? That would be near the intersection of 4th and Washington, which maybe would explain why they called Washington Community Center. That block is currently that parking square under the highway across the street from Washington Park, which is between like the, what's it called? The historical building and the Grout Museum. So where the Women's Club meets, Women's Club and then all the Grout Museum properties. That's where Washington Park is. But, oh, and also, what if it were 419 East, just 419 instead of 1419 East 4th Street? That would be in Lincoln Park. I mean, that's, if there were an address there, that's Lincoln Park now. So this is really, I'm really confused about where this original place was. Over the years, it was called different things in the minutes, recreation center sometimes, no address was ever given. A clipping in 1973 when Teddy Finnegan was putting her one-woman show of macrame refers to the venue as the Waterloo Recreation and Arts Center. So we know this existed, and we have lots of information from our minutes about the continuing saga of the Guild's relationship to this place. Of course, now there's a Washington Recreation Center and the Waterloo Center for the Arts. So they're separate things, but at the time they were together. They served a multi-purpose and I don't know where it is, but somebody will tell us one of these days. Also, some of the early meetings were held in members' homes. One meeting was held in the home ec laboratory at Iowa State Teachers College. So we'll get back to this topic about 4th Street in Waterloo later. So one of the sources of information about the Guild is the collection of member books that we have. It's incomplete, but we have most of the member books in a plastic bin. I think Karen DeVries may have provided this bin when she was secretary. The very first extant member, but the one we still have, the first one that we still have, was produced in 1959, 1960. They met, as we can tell from this member book and from others, they tended to meet in October and November, and then all the months January through May. 4 of those meetings were held, and that year were held at the Waterloo Recreation Center, or whatever it was called. Names and addresses for 29 members were printed in the book, and the cover shows a hand-drawn shuttle wound with real yarn. There it is. So, and each one may have had a different yarn, I don't know. The first page of what was then called the yearbook and program lists the officers, and then by their first names, and then all except Thelma Short were then listed with their husband's name at the back of the book. So the formal name, their married name in the back of the book. The second printed page of the booklet displays a quotation. He who works with his hands is a laborer. He who works with his hands and his mind is a craftsman. He who works with his hand and his mind and his heart is an artist. And he is obviously a he. In these member books, every meeting page, so the meetings were on different pages. At this point, they were still printed only on one side of the paper. Every meeting page lists the location, exhibits, and names of 3 or 4 hostesses. Those exhibits seem to be collections of woven samples from other guilds from around the US and Canada. And I think they were supplied by the guild like wrote in or called in to request them, and then they came and you got to borrow them for a little amount of money and you got to keep them for a month or something like that so people could see the samples. So in November, it was a Christmas exhibit from the Portland, Oregon Guild, and January from Leamington, Ontario Guild. And so here's a sample page. Here's the November page. You see the location at Margaret Johnston's home. The exhibit that time was that Christmas exhibit from the Portland, Oregon Guild. Roll call. There was very often a roll call activity in these early years. This time it was bring a hand-woven Christmas or gift idea. There was a book display and discussion, and there were 3 hostesses listed. So we've got some traditions developing here. By the way, the roll call for some of the years, one year it was egg timer tips. And I was really puzzled about that. And I almost phoned up an older relative-in-law to see if she would know, because she was from the Midwest and acquainted with women's clubs at the time. But now I think an egg timer tip would be like they just have a little egg timer, you know, sand in a glass, and maybe you get 2 minutes or something for your tip, and then you sit down and somebody else talks. So we're missing some member books, but through the years, the pattern was usually that the member books were folded quarter page size, like what we have now. There was usually a creative handcrafted color. So putting the member books together at that time meant individually making each cover. And I can show you some of those afterwards if you're interested. It listed the officers. There were either 4 or 3 officers during these years, sometimes secretary and treasurer with the same person. There would be an inspirational quotation or poem somewhere in the book, and one year there was a little quotation, a little snippet for each meeting. The monthly programs are on separate pages listing the location, what the program would be, and the hostesses, among other things. And then toward the back of the book then were the members' names and addresses. So we followed this tradition pretty well. Here's the inspirational poem in the 6970 book. So 10 years. The hobbyists, they mean hobbyists. A hobby's a joy, a heaven-sent gift. When troubles annoy, it gives you a lift. It soothes and it warms, it eases all hurts, it thrills and informs, delights and diverts. It brightens your chores and bans irritations as much as it bores your friends and relations. Isn't that inspirational? And then the books changed over the years. Phone numbers were added in 64 for the first time. It's not as though they didn't have telephones before that, but they just weren't added into the book as part of members' information. And then a calling tree was provided for a number of years. And each person, president then would call 2 people. Each of those people then would call 2 or 3 other people and so on. The tree was listed in the book, and that was how communications were passed on. The very first Virginia Olsen Award was in 1985. It wasn't at the end of the year. She had apparently passed away the year, 2 years before, I think, or during the previous year. So the 1984 book, I think, was in memory of Virginia Olsen for the whole year. But then afterwards, Virginia Olsen Award began to be given in May. Emails were finally added to member addresses in 2001, about at least 20 years after lots of people already had email and used email a lot. The mission statement was added in 2007 in the member book right away, and birthdays have been included since 2007. Now, what about the spinners? We've been the Northeast Iowa Weavers Group. What about, where did that spinners get started? Well, Eleanor Mast presented to the Guild in 68. She told about her experiences spinning, showing her wheel and a variety of fibers she has spun. And like most of us, some she intends to spin. Then 2 other members brought their wheels, so that made it a spinning day. Eleanor reports there are 9 spinners in the area now that she knows of, according to those minutes. So, and I searched and searched and cannot find a set of minutes in which the members voted to change the name. But by September 68, so just a few months after Eleanor Mast presented, they said, well, they were going to order a new sign for the Dairy Cattle Congress to say Northeast Iowa Weavers and Spinners. But the secretary who had typed this up put little arrows there in ink showing, oh, nope, that's not right. It's supposed to be Northeast Iowa Spinners and Weavers. And actually the minutes in future meetings sometimes said the name of the organization in one way and sometimes the other way. The minutes for November 68 say the meeting of 22 members of the Northeast Iowa Weavers and Spinners Guild, so written the way we write it. But it said in the minutes that the bylaws had been revised on November 12th. So maybe that's when. Maybe that was the amendment to change the guild's name, but I can't find it in the minutes. And then also at that November 68 meeting, both the weavers and the spinners were paid for their hour at Cattle Congress this year. Weavers put in 190 hours. The spinners put in 127 hours, and they had different rates of pay. Well, that was because the guild members at a previous meeting had already agreed that when they got $200 from the Cattle Congress, that was the deal, $100 would go to the weavers, $100 would go to the spinners, minus $10 each, and then they would prorate the pay given hours and so on. So somebody had done the calculations for the spinners, somebody else had done it for the weavers, and they got paid. But the next year's book, this is after 68, the next year's book still had the same name on it. And this is a sample then of the kind of cover you would see. So here's a beautiful piece of weaving, and each member book would have had a weaving. And in fact, the weaving samples were different. Some years, we have 2 copies of one book in the 1970s, and they were from 2 different members who had contributed them to the records, and the weavings are different. Handcrafted. Now, in the 73-74 booklet, we do have the new name. I'll show you that inside, but with the apostrophes added. But just note this picture, which was the cover of the book, and it does show weavers and spinners. So wheel is a little strange, and but this seems to become the logo for a while after the move, and I cannot read the name of that artist. But we were the Weavers and Spinners Guild by then for sure, with or without apostrophes. So I thought, okay, let's just do a quick sample of the programs because I know we have to go fast. So instead of choosing like the beginning of the year, because that was changing and they were always preparing for Cattle Congress, I just picked March as a sample. So March every 10 years. So 60 years ago, March 1960, the guest speaker was Grace Smith of Sioux City, Iowa, weaving with linen. And then the minutes describe in detail what it was she brought. So she presented first, then they had lunch and coffee, and then Miss Smith resumed her discussion about lots of different fibers she had woven with and about the draperies she had made for her home that she was matching to the wallpaper. Lots of other materials she'd used. And then at the very end, both in plain color and plaid, which Miss Smith believes to be like a part of weaving as yet virtually untouched. So that stimulated people, I think, to be doing tartans then a few years later. In March 1970, the member book shows question marks. They hadn't decided what the presentation would be, but then from the meeting minutes, we know that Eleanor Mast showed a runner of crackle weave, things that she had received from her aunt. Also bags made of plastic, rope made with a spool. And then Mina Hallett gave a demonstration of how to make a warp chain using a warping frame. I don't know if the guild still has it, but one was donated, and it was back in an instructional room for a while. Great big warping frame. She also showed her knitted little Easter chickens. In March 1980, which was 40 years ago, finishing techniques. Marty Olson and Pam Spacey gave that workshop. In March 1990, Dabble Day. There were things we could do a painted warp, leaf printing, and things to do with drums. And then the report of that meeting was that Edith Angela had demonstrated leaf dyeing, felted balls, made from drums. And then members could participate in making the felted balls. 20 years ago, learned to make a tassel and demonstrate to the group and volunteers. It was just members of the group. And this was when I think we have 2 books on making tassels, beautiful, with beautiful photographic illustrations. I think that's when they joined the library. 10 years ago, actually the presentation was supposed to be something else, but because of weather and sickness, the March and April switched. And Karen Kitchen, or March was moved ahead. Karen Kitchen had some photographs of when she and Norman had been to France, and I think they had seen the Bayeux Tapestry too, I think, or a part of it that was on display. And she also showed the Apocalypse tapestries. These aren't all on display at the same time. These are tapestries, oh gee, what, about 20 feet high? This is also in Northwest France, about 150 yards long maybe, but only a few are displayed at a time. And these are tapestries made, as you can guess from the title, from scenes from the Book of Revelation. And those were some amazing pictures. And then this March, our program was going to offer members the opportunity to bid on the wealth of yarn the Guild has been blessed with recently. That's from the newsletter. And so is the illustration that Lisa found to illustrate the closet full, bursting with the yarns that we had. And as we know, that didn't happen, but that was a sampling of programs from March through the years. Now, what about the Guild's Fiber Arts Studio? So we as a Guild are the people, we are the members. When did the idea of having a building, having a place that we would call our Fiber Arts Studio get started? Well, way back in November '66, there was a report of a discussion with the Recreation Building Management to set aside space in the basement for the looms. And I think some of the looms, I'm trying to figure this out, Karen Kitchen could probably tell us. Some of the looms were owned by the Recreation Building. I think they had purchased them, some were donated. Anyway, they wanted, if they had that space, then they could start giving workshops 3 days a week, starting in January of '67. And then there was plenty more discussion through the years, but they were there for 20 years. They had been paying money for renovations, but they heard from Renata Sack at the October 1975 meeting about the Cedar Arts Forum's idea to transform the old Gates Park Clubhouse into an arts and crafts center. So the Guild created a committee to investigate that. They needed essentially to have a place where looms could be assembled and warped up for use by members. So the search for a studio. And pretty soon, once they had moved to Gates Park, that location was referenced as the Fiber Arts Studio or the Fiber Arts Studio. Karen Kitchen preferred the French spelling, which was consonant with UNI Strayer-Wood Theater, which had been named in 1975, although it wasn't completed in '75. So, so for many years, it was the F-I-B-R-E Arts Studio, as shown in the minutes of October '77, that the Iowa Federation met there. And that spelling was often used in meeting minutes. Some members paid extra dues to have keys to the building. Stationery was printed showing the Fiber Arts Studio located on Donald Street, the address of the Gates Gates Park Clubhouse. And there is that, they were using that as their logo, I think, on the stationery. Remember the Weaver and Spinner up in the attic of the like Scandinavian house. And then, so this was a sign-in sheet. So apparently they signed in on a sheet of stationery, and it shows the Donald Street address. Well, then after 15 years on Donald Street, suddenly the Guild was informed that the Waterloo Park Commission would be expanding the Gates Park Golf Course services. And on March 19th, 1990, we have several copies of the letter. The director of Parks and Forestry, I don't know if it's Tagtoe or Tagtow, wrote to Guild President Karen Kitchen, the Guild would have to vacate the pro shop by June 1st. And they offered to help and that sort of thing. But immediately on receipt of this letter, Karen took action. Just a few days later, she wrote a letter addressed to past and present members with a copy of Rick's letter on the back, saying the board had already initiated a search for a new location. See, that was back when a letter on March 19th would have been delivered in Waterloo by March 20th, I think. Takes longer now. So she said that the board had already initiated a search for a new location, and there were names of board members to contact with suggestions: Karen Kitchen, Edith Hantula, Mildred Pierce, and Audrey Stevens. And by the end of June, a purchase offer of $35,000 was for 111 114 Main Street in Cedar Falls had been made and accepted. I think the record indicates that the listing was originally for $39,000 or $37,000. I don't remember, but it's in the records. Then they wrote a letter. We have enough money for the down payment and a little to spare, but need more for those little extras, tables and chairs. So keep selling those raffle tickets. And this is so sad. If you don't know how to sell the tickets, just cry on a person's shoulder and tell them you need a place to go to on Tuesdays. This approach has worked very well for one member. So that's what the Guild resorted to. This had been a catalog center, catalog service. It had been empty for some time. There's the photographs from the scrapbook that Carla found, and a couple of members hanging out there. Well, they immediately went to work cleaning. There were apparently problems with moving in. Karen Kitchen's note was, just ask anybody who was there. And they also added more than $3,000 to the mortgage to cover repair of the flat roof. Audrey Stevens and Norman and Karen Kitchen were the guarantors of the mortgage. And there was a rule that until that mortgage was paid off, either Karen Kitchen or Audrey Stevens needed to be the treasurer to make sure that that mortgage was being paid. So for years, until paying it off in, is it 2002 maybe, or 2003, it was completely paid off, and then they didn't have to take turns being treasurer anymore. Each of them had experience. Karen Kitchen business experience, and Audrey Stevens had been treasurer for a national women's philanthropic organization. So they were fully competent to do that. And there was a little bit of rent from the college students in the upstairs apartment that covered the mortgage payments. So we were doing pretty well. The member booklet for 90-91 listed all the meetings at the Fiber Arts Studio, at the door that received the mail, 111 Main Street. And the September 4th meeting began with a tour of our new home. Maybe I should go back and show you. You see that there are two entries there. So there was a door on the right and a door on the left. The right-hand window, as we're looking at it, became the showroom. We had an huge antique display case, glass and mahogany, or maybe oak display case, lighted on the left side as you came in, and other things hung up for display on the right. And then on the left side, that was the loom room. So there was a doorway going between. The door was left open most of the time, and all the looms were set up there. Whoops, I'm going backwards. Okay, and the 94-95 member book showed the Guild's new home and the logo. I think maybe Karen Kitchen designed it, but I'm not sure. So the building had, a sign had been made, Fiber Arts Studio, an awning in those colors of teal and purple had been installed, wonderful brass frame for that, and the addresses. So that was the studio starting in fall of 1990. And here's a photograph of mostly just the two display windows in the right-hand door. The left-hand door isn't showing there, of the frontage. And our logo there that had been in December showing the Christmas display in the display window. You can see the looms on the left. And we always talk about having a huge wall of displaying on the left-hand side in the loom room, of putting up all the cotton yarns, the colorful cotton yarns. Also, here's another photograph showing the right-hand window with that tiny spinning wheel from Audrey Stevens in the window. And by this time, special protection had been installed to the windows so that nothing in the window would be sunlight damaged. And then we got a new logo, Northeast Iowa Weavers and Spinners, very artistically designed by Kristen Cleveland. And there she is weaving on a table loom at Cattle Congress. We were sort of doing a sheep to shawl in front of the banner showing the logo that she had designed. So in addition to new siding and awning, the trim was repainted, new garage door, security gate installed because it was the main building plus a garage, and the apartment upstairs had a 3-season room with an opening. Somebody's mic is on and we're getting a whole lot of noise. Could you mute your microphone, whoever is making noise, and then other people won't have to hear it. So there was a place for, like, you could probably even bring up a piano through that hole in the Three Seasons porch of that building. So a lot of things needed to be fixed. The guild finally evicted. Those lovely college students had been succeeded by a succession of folks that were not keeping up the apartment. So we finally evicted them, lost a couple of months rent, but the rent was very low. Remodeled the apartment completely, everything except new kitchen appliances and so on, but everything was cleaned, polished the wood floors, replaced windows and so on. It was actually much, much better in terms of temperature control in the winter time, and looked great. New carpeting in some places, and all the old carpeting was picked up, and the stains from somebody's kitty litter pan, the kitty hadn't gone in the pan quite a lot. So things were fixed, and then we were able to rent it out at for like 3 times as much. It's great, huge 3-bedroom apartment. But then around 2006, 2007, we even applied for a grant because we were trying to figure out, ooh, what do? We need more meeting space. We need more room for teaching. And it would be good if it were all on one floor, not going upstairs for the apartment, downstairs in the basement for all the storage, because memberships were aging out. We looked for other property. The guild looked for other property, but hadn't yet found one when it was decided to sell that building. It was sold for over $200,000. Remember, we'd paid only $35,000 plus repairs. So considerable profit. Lots of people put stuff in storage again, like Audrey Stevens. And then it was sold and everything taken out just days before the flood of 2008. So that was good timing. The 2008-2009 member book lists the location of the studio at, and we were spelling it, I think, F-I-B-E-R at that time, at 7504 and a half University Avenue, which is a few blocks east of UNI, a few blocks east of that little prairie and the bridge. It was the back half of a dentist's office that we rented for the year. Found him to, and this is what it looks like now. There's a St. Croix hospice in the back of the building. He was an unsuitable landlord. So we were homeless in 2009, 2010. Meetings were held in the big meeting room upstairs in Cedar Falls Public Library, had a meeting in the Hearst Center for the Arts, and in December for the potluck, we went to Elaine Waller's house in Waverly. And then one of the board members mentioned, why do we even need a building at all? Let's just take the money, the profits, and let's just divide it up among all the members. And then we'll all have money to go to workshops and buy fiber and that sort of thing. Well, of course, as a nonprofit organization, that would be criminal activity. Folks got revved up again to search for a place and purchased the former veterinarian's office at 3257 West 4th Street. So once again, the guild was meeting on 4th Street in Waterloo. New roof, plumbing, insulation, signing. We paved the parking lot, did some exterior paint and trim, metal trim. Opened up the interior spaces by knocking down walls. The guild's fiber art studio is working well and looking good. And the member book cover for 2017-2018 showing Joyce Voss and the fiber art studio at the end of the rainbow. Colette, you even happened to catch that photo. You can tell that the parking lot is wet. But this was just zooming through, and we haven't explored all sorts of interesting things that could be found in the records. For instance, all the programs and activities. I was just giving you some examples of, every 10 years, what were they doing in March, or what did they plan to do in March? But there is so much in the records of all the things that they were studying and learning and doing through the years, participating in all kinds of activities. Also, the question of money. somebody should do a study of that. How much were dues and how did they change through the years? How did they work sales? Where did they get most of their money? And then the process of creating a nonprofit 501c3 organization. There were sad stories in the record. The coffee urn. They got the coffee urn because one member had an idea that if they would save this is so sad, save their gold bond stamps and collect them eventually. And it's with great triumph in the minutes. And finally they get their coffee urn. This is back when they're meeting in the recreation center. And then later, the question about how to get a microwave. And so it's not surprising this issue of money was so problematic when I was on the board when we were making those renovations to the apartment upstairs on Main Street in Cedar Falls. And some of the members from the older days were incensed. They said, and we had done the work to figure out, okay, then if we're able to rent out the apartment this much, then, it will eventually pay for itself in like 2 years, we thought, all that work. But it still was so much money. It hurt them so much because we were spending money willy-nilly, it seemed. And they had like every dollar had been so important in the earlier days. So the whole question of money through the years would be a really neat study. Also the mortgage payments and rental income in various places. Demonstrating and participating. There are lots of information in the records. And of course, the events like Cattle Congress and county fairs and so on, everything that the Guild participated in, it's astounding the kind of activity and how many people participated through the years. We also haven't explored that equipment. When did they get their first loom? Because they're talking about the looms as being theirs, and when they moved them to the Gates Park location, to the Fiber Art Studio. The spinning wheels and the other equipment. How did we acquire that through the years? Can we go through the records and do some sort of inventory? There were in the minutes, there are sweet moments and snarky minutes. There is a recognition. There are clippings from the Courier when a member has had a significant wedding anniversary. Or when one woman's mother-in-law had passed away, a card was agreed to send a card. And there were snarky comments too. One of the secretaries for almost the entire year put in comments like, there was considerable discussion on the topic, but as usual, nothing was decided. And those minutes were approved as read the very next month, and the very next month it continued in that vein all the way through. And she's somebody who is an icon, passed away now, but an icon in this guild. So somebody who's into social relationships might have fun with that. Also, this question of, is it an art? Is it a craft? What is it we're doing here? Everything from, a weaving that was displayed in a display at the Museum of Modern Art to little knitted chickens. Somebody could write a piece about that. Study groups, workshops, and classes. It's so interesting what came up today. Pat's idea to create a study group, and I know Carla has been interested in this too, and we used to do it. In fact, there was one year, the Weavers Study Group did 3 weaves every month, and they would present all 3 of those weaves, and then after the meeting, they would get rid of that warp, take that warp off the loom, and set up for 3 more structures for the next month. So very prolific sometimes, and other times, well, there's a study group, but nobody seems to be doing anything. Membership trends. Were there always men? Were there always young people? And then the different levels of membership, like with a key, or those who paid $50 and those who paid $100, even though the dues were only $10 or something like And those were sometimes marked with an asterisk if you paid extra in the member book. Guild boards, the number of officers changed through the years. The terms of the officers changed through the years. And then other board members. The very first additional board member, I think, was an education chair. And then we know there's a library because a librarian was also appointed. Also, we haven't covered in this our distinguished members. Some of our members are known or were known far and wide for the excellence of their craft. We've got members now who have had items featured in Handwoven magazine. Carla Stilley. Sue Salisbury was a past member who had something done. Karen Holman had something in Handwoven magazine. And of course, Doris. Oh, I've got her picture, I think. Wait a minute. Yes, Doris Southard, known far and wide for her bobbin weaving. Whoops. Shoot. Let's get back to this. Also skilled teaching, and Doris Southard was known for that too, but others who have taught and taught and taught. Carla Bowen was teaching spinning. That was after, I think, Elaine Hantala had taught spinning. Lots of great teachers in the Guild. Also, we have some members who are distinguished by their generosity to the Guild in time, in money, and in donating things to the Guild, such as Marty stored things, I don't know how many times while we were homeless. Robert and Jan Williams, most recently, a few years ago, donated so much equipment, so many items, so many publications to the Guild, and have distinguished themselves to the Guild in that way. And innovators and agents of change for the Guild. There's certain flex points when what the Guild is doing changes and moves up, like in 2004 when Karen Kitchen initiated the Weaving in the Schools program. By the way, I am just so amused every time I see this photograph. Does anybody know where it was taken? It was in our current Fiber Arts studio. Anybody recognize that parrot green wall?
The bathroom.
It is in the big people bathroom. Yes, the tall people bathroom. Yes, Karen wanted to show how delightfully her Japanese themed top went with the parrot green. Anyway, I think that's, yes, that is all I have. How do I unshare my screen? How do I go back to, whoop. Thank you.
I can do it on mine.
Hear me? Did you host me? So that's all I have. And it is awfully close to noon. I don't know if you want to continue anymore or if you have questions.
Ooh.
Let's write down our questions so that write down them now while they're fresh, and then let's look at them again at our next
Yeah, our
meeting.
next
Or get them
meeting
handed in.
is tips, so we definitely will have room at the next meeting that we could probably extend the conversation into the next.
Okay.
And people could send emails to Karen or
Okay.
I, whatever, if you have some questions or some things you want to pursue